So vibrato, and preferably throat vibrato, which has kind of been winning in the throat versus diaphragm or abdominal diaphragm vibrato wars of late. Here's how I teach it. I've had a lot of success with it. The first thing is what I call the 4-step exercise. And if you do this right, it's very good at making sure we don't vibrate from the bottom of our air column. I wouldn't worry too much if at slower speeds you're kind of in the rib cage area or even kind of the upper abdomen, but I don't like the idea of moving the foundation of the sound. It tends to affect the pitch and the tone way too much, I think. And of course, we don't want to move in the embouchure. And this will really help with that. So you can pick any note. I'll do an A today. Half D is a good one. If you're prone to be too tight in your embouchure, you can see it tensing. You might go for lower notes like G. If you're prone to let this weaken, you might go for higher notes to make sure you can work on those things. So step 1, we're going to, without tonguing, do this air pulse, and I want you to really listen for the hiss sound between the notes. Hopefully you hear that hiss sound between, and you can do plenty of them. I think that was about 8. You can do 10, 12, until it's comfortable. Then once you get that, step 2 is actually a staccato. I find that a lot of the things that physically we do for vibrato and staccato, I think, are actually very similar when we're doing that staccato at a slower tempo. This does not apply for a tempo where or a rhythm where it's fast enough that you're going to be doing like an actual tongue-ended staccato. This is for when we're going slow enough that we need to not end the note with the tongue, because it would sound really pecky and obnoxious and we'd hear it. It works really well for those things. So here's step 2. We just add the tongue to the beginning of each note. We keep listening for the air hiss. So a lot of times when students first start this, they try to let go a little too much after this one, or they try to put the tongue back on the reed at the end, and they get more of a, or if you hear the pitch shift like that, you probably moved a little too low. You probably let this go. You want to keep the core muscles engaged, and of course we breathe down here so that we can do that. If the breath isn't going here in the first place, this all gets much harder. So that's step 2. Step 3, exactly the same as step 1. Turning. Hopefully this is moving a little. It's very hard to feel, but usually if you look for it, you'll see it. And step 4 is vibrato, but the thing is, you just don't go as far. The same physical movement you use to get down to the air hiss where the note didn't respond, you're going to use to get almost that far. If you accidentally get there sometimes, that's fine. Pitch movement, especially at this slow speed with us doing it this wide, but I think of vibrato as primarily an intensity vibrato. There is variation in that among oboe players, but that's how I think of it. So that's the 4-step exercise. Your first week you're going to do it very slow, every level or every step of it the same speed, because you definitely don't want to hit step 4 and try to go much faster than you did on step 3. It kind of gets in the way of the point of the exercise of practicing that physical movement in a way that's easier to hear if you're getting close to it before you apply it to vibrato. Because of course one of the hard things about vibrato, we're moving things we don't consciously move very often, and we're supposed to not move things that are much easier for us to access and make a sound that's at least kind of similar. We know it's not the same because it doesn't do everything we want it to as we get better at it, but in the first stages it can be hard to avoid. And I find this exercise is very good at that. So I would do that for like a good week. Find some exercises with some staccato in them. If you use the Edlifson oboe student book, I like that one for this. And lesson 20 has a bunch of staccato exercises you can do this with, but you can also make up your own. You can just use a scale. For example, one of the Edlifson exercises is basically an F scale anyway, and it's got a lot of staccato. So first you play it with no tongue. doing quarter notes for the staccato, for the air hiss part, when you get to the whole notes, try to do quarter note vibrato. That is, if you're in that oboe student book by Blaine Edlison, that's lesson 20, line 2. And then you, of course, add your tongue to it. It's worth noting that that air hiss is going to be a lot more noticeable to you than it is from a distance. Looking at the volume indicator on the screen, I'm not even entirely sure it's picking it up, and my mic is a little closer to me than I would usually want for oboe. This might sound bad, but just to make sure you can hear it, I'm going to demonstrate some of that right up next to the mic for just a second. Step 3 and step 2. And then, so we can hear that. It's also important to note that there are some things that could really get in your way when you're doing this. If you're tight in the upper body posture or in the embouchure, the best vibrato in the world won't make it through. So if your head is ducked, I didn't change what I was moving vibrato-wise, but you can see it got choked off. So tension in the shoulders, neck and head, or in the embouchure can hide good work you are actually doing. So if you feel like you're just having a really hard time getting it to come out, check on that. So once you do get comfortable with that, you've done several of those slower exercises, either in a book or you just made them up. You can pick a scale and do that to it. And once you're a little more comfortable with that, then you just move to eighth notes. I'll try the 4-step exercise on a half full D and on eighth notes a little faster. So step 1. And step 2. And step 3. And step 4. So you'll get to a point eventually where you'll reach a speed that's just not really possible to get the air hiss at. Triplets is pretty hard. And at that point, you can still do the vibrato, but it starts to be a little harder to do the other steps, and that's fine. Doing this in the slow tempo with the quarter notes and then a little faster with the eighth notes, anywhere in that range will kind of build that skill in. And again, you can make up staccato exercises, find them in books, play them with no tongue, so you're really forced to listen to that air hiss and to get that control over where the pressure is hitting the reed and where it's not quite accessing the oboe. And it doesn't feel like you're choking it back, or it shouldn't. That's a complaint some people have about throat vibrato, but it should not feel like you're tightening or controlling on those air hisses. To me, it just feels like I'm not pushing the pressure at the oboe anymore. I'm still strong here, but I'm not quite finishing the circuit, maybe. It's a little hard to describe, but it should not feel super tense at any point. Matter of fact, where a lot of people struggle is trying to be too tense doing it. It's important to have that relaxation, and that air hiss feels like relaxation to me. That should feel like a relaxation step, I think. And looking at the muscles, that adds up. I believe that's when these relax a little more. So once you get that really comfortable and you can start to apply it, I know that this isn't the most musical way, but just to physically get used to it, because it's hard to apply something musically if you don't have the physical control to do it. You can start doing it on longer notes in your band music. Just don't get too crazy at the ends of phrases. No one wants "Happy birthday to you" because we got excited about our vibrato. So keep it calm, but you can start to apply it there just to get more physically used to it. As you get stronger with it and kind of develop, in maybe a few months, we can start to do what I call the vibrato game, which is an awfully fun term for something that maybe is just a metronome exercise. But you can set a metronome or just tap your foot. Not too fast a tempo, somewhere in like 60 to 80 probably. Maybe even as fast as 85, but probably not much faster. And with my students, I'll hold up 0. Always I do 0 first, because if we can't take the vibrato away and have a good tone, we don't have good vibrato. We have questionable tone. And that's important too. Don't reduce your support or your tone. That tone still has to have all of its core and all of its color just as much without the vibrato. The vibrato cannot be there to make up for weak tone. So that's important. With no vibrato, we still have to sound just as good and not like significantly quieter or less in tune. Or less pretty or less full in the tone. More full than pretty. There's a roundness to the tone when it's correct and all the overtones are in there, and that should be there. And then I move, 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 and 5 as people are getting better, but I spend a lot of time on 2 and 3, especially early on. So I'll go ahead and set a metronome. 72 will work, and do this myself. You won't be able to see the numbers because I can't hold up numbers and play at the same time, but you should be able to hear them. I'll start with 0. You can do this without somebody holding up a hand. You can just make up the numbers in your own head, but you do want to be changing between. I'll do a B flat. So that's that one. You can even mix that with your band warm-ups, which if you're in a band you may have noticed are usually not that useful for oboe. So that kind of thing. So that you're really making sure that you still have conscious control over the movement. And of course, your face has got to be still, your core has got to be still. Those are very important things. If you get a little movement kind of in the upper abdomen, it's okay. There's a reason that diaphragm vibrato was a common thought for a while, but they have scoped people out, and even people who think they're using the upper abdomen or the diaphragm usually do. Actually, I say usually always have movement in the larynx. It seems that the larynx is probably the true location. That's just not an area we have great conscious control over. So we're doing our best to get there. So this is probably more sympathetic movement if it's happening. It's not causing the vibrato, and we don't want to do too much with that because we don't want to shake our sound in unintentional extra ways. We also don't want to move the body. Sometimes young students will move their entire selves with the vibrato. It's not the wobble that's causing it, or at least it shouldn't be. So you should be able to stay still and still do it. Matter of fact, sometimes you'll find that if you're moving other things, it's actually getting in the way of the vibrato and blocking it from coming out. So again, we want to look for no unintentional movement, especially in the face. That's the biggest one. And making sure that we have a good round embouchure. We're not pushing the chin forward or doing anything that would block the vibrato from working in a good way and then force us to try to find some other less good way to make a similar but definitely not quite right sound. So anyway, that's the vibrato game. You do that a lot till it's comfortable, and then you can start to mix up your vibrato rhythms and your band music a little more, and even do them a little more musically. But really, the next step, as far as working on it as a fundamental, is to add it to a long tone, not a band long tone. A quiet to loud to quiet long tone. If you've got an oboe teacher, you've almost certainly seen this one before. The most common version is you start at 1, you count up to 9, getting as loud as you can, you come back to 1. And you speed the vibrato up as you go. The softest levels probably won't have vibrato, like 1-ish. When you're around that number, 1, maybe half of 2. You might consider just being quiet and pretty and not really having much or any vibrato, especially when you're new to it. As you get louder, you want the vibrato to go faster and wider. It's good to be able to control it the other way too, but realistically in music, vibrato is a musical tool, and as the music's getting more intense, it's probably getting louder, and as it's getting louder and more intense, you're going to want to emphasize that with faster and wider vibrato most of the time, or maybe faster and narrower. Sometimes the width can be a little more dependent on style than intensity, but certainly the speed. So I'll do that on a D. D is actually a fairly simple one. If you are having trouble with that, with changing the speed of your vibrato naturally, several things can help. Singing is always good. Everything we've done here can be done singing as well as playing, although you'll run out of air much sooner, and that can be kind of a helpful way to get past. Sometimes this thing convinces us to feel like we're working harder than we have to be, and singing can kind of help you find how to do these things a little bit in a more relaxed way. But if you're struggling with this, sometimes in the first steps, it can help to almost think of it as the vibrato game. So I'll do that more basic version of it. Actually very difficult for me to do, but hopefully you could tell that I was kind of thinking one, and then some twos and some threes and some fours. You can do that if it's difficult for you to change the speed without doing it. And then of course, ideally, same way that we don't crescendo like we're in Minecraft, we crescendo like we're in nice high dimensional graphic slopes and things. We want that vibrato speed to also be not tied to a metronome as we get better at it. But yeah, that's the gist of it. You can, as you get better at it, start to also work on keeping it there as your fingers move, so you can set up some nice vibrato. Start to move your fingers around once you've set the vibrato and not change it. As we start to have faster fingers, we might find that we can no longer, you shouldn't really be counting pulses metronomically anyway, but you might get to the point where you can't even feel necessarily that there's more than one pulse per note. Sometimes there's less. You can think of a violinist's left hand. It's not really concerned with how fast the right hand's moving. Maybe the number of pulses for one note was 0.765432. Who knows? It's not really tied in once we get really good at it. So. Hopefully some of that worked. So even behind 16th notes, it's technically possible for it to be there, but you don't want to work super hard at it, because if you do, sometimes you get and start to get weaker here and shakier in general, which we certainly don't want. I should maybe cut this part out. It is late at night and my fingers are not listening to me. And then you can also start to add it with tongued notes. It's very much the same principle. You set it up, you start tonguing, and you try to make sure you're not trying to count pulses per tongue. So you can hear it staying there, hopefully, when I am articulating. It's good to practice it in different ranges once you get it comfortable. Sometimes it can feel a little different up high. You might almost feel it higher. It can feel a little different down low. I find that I'm more aware of my core support with my belly kind of pushing out and down. When I'm down low, I don't necessarily feel it shaking, but I have to be aware lower in my air column down there for it to really feel right. So you might almost feel like it's a little lower. It probably technically isn't physically, but resonance-wise, maybe it can still feel that way.